Welcome to Civics in a Year, the podcast that makes civic literacy fast, accessible, and surprisingly engaging. In just 10 minutes an episode, we'll tackle one of 250 essential questions about American democracy, how it works, why it matters, and what it means for you. Whether you're a student, a teacher, or just someone who wants to better understand your country and your rights, you're in the right place. Civics in a Year is powered by the Civic Literacy Curriculum from the Center for American Civics and is produced in partnership with the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. Welcome back to Civics in a Year. Today we are talking about the debates between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists and what we can learn from it today. If you have not listened to the previous episode on why the Federalist Papers still help us understand, I believe that the previous episode and this episode are a really great pairing. We have Dr. Carrese back with us. Dr. Carrese, what do these debates between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists teach us today?
Thank you, Liz. And this conversation, this question just reminds me, for anybody who's been listening, the great service you're doing. We're all trying to do in the Center for American Civics to dig a little more deeply into these founding principles and these sources of argument about, insight into our founding principles. And this is a big kind of meta principle in itself. And I've mentioned it in earlier episodes, and as you just mentioned the previous one, that America is in its core, it's a indispensable element of our character, a free people who debate. We disagree. Now that can seem like a paradox. Well, if you just disagree about everything, how are you one people? How do you hold together? And there are moments where we've had that challenge, and we'll talk a little bit about this in this episode. But it may be a paradox, but that doesn't mean it's a contradiction or ridiculous. It is the case that to be American, we don't come from one race or ethnic group or one religion or one bloodline, or that's not what America has ever been. You could go through your family history, my family history. My Italian grandfather came on a boat in 1912, and on my father's side and my mother's side from Ireland and Germany, and everybody's an immigrant, right? And we have the greatest number of immigrants, greatest pluralism of any country ever in the history of the world, all as free, equal people. At least that's our aspiration. So how do we hold that together? It's that we believe in the principle of debate and discussion, while that's on the basis of some shared principles. So the paradox is we have the shared principles, mostly, I hope, of the Declaration of Independence, of the Constitution, of the amendments, but the Constitution itself is amendable. The Declaration arises out of debate. The Constitution arises out of debate. It's an amendable Constitution. We immediately debate amendments. It's not even ratified, and the deals are being struck in the state ratification debates. Some of them that we Federalists, we pro Constitution people, we make a deal, we'll immediately propose amendments, covering classic common law rights and Bill of Rights. So this is the American character. Certain shared principles, what we debate, what they mean, and then we debate, more particular policy topics. It is American. The great example of it, since we don't know a lot about the debates in 1775 and 1776, moving immediately toward independence, we know, a bit about them. But boy, we've got Madison's notes and other people's notes from the Constitutional Convention. And then we've got these extraordinary written arguments, opinion essays for and against ratification. And so what do we learn? What do we still have to learn today more particularly? So there's this general principle of debate. What does that mean more particularly? Well, you can see it in the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, especially, I'll say the Federalists are getting smarter. Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, I'm of the view that the Federalists had the better argument. But how did they have the better argument? Because they got their butts kicked by these Anti-Federalist writers, Brutus, Federal Farmer, Sentinel, some of the best ones, who are smart. And so the Federalists, Hamilton's got to get them organized. And there are other friends of the Constitution writing, but to get organized, pull in Madison, this is like the A-team, John Jay, and they are getting smarter. about what the Constitution means, about what the deeper principles are, and learning about it. And I think it's no accident by the end that Madison, in a way, has set himself up to say, okay, this Constitution has now been ratified, and what he's learned during the process of writing the Federalists, that he's primed and ready to be sponsoring the Bill of Rights or amendments, 13 amendments originally in the House, because he's learned. He's learned what was strong, what was weak. This is an obvious weakness. It's not worth dying on this hill. We'll propose amendments. So to get smarter by learning to people you seem to disagree with, you seem to be opponents about it, rational, reasonable, civil discourse, good for you. If the other side's really in good spirit, it's good for the other side. And you might actually not any longer be sides. You might come together and make some compromises and forge a new third way. So, the general point about debate. Secondly, that the Anti-Federalists forced the pro-Constitution side to get smarter. Third, the debate did produce the Bill of Rights. That's a big deal.
Yes, it's a very big deal.
And that's a sort of larger lesson, right? Accepting the need for revision, accepting amendment. The amendment process really going to mean something. It's really, there's a kind of constitutional humility in the Constitution. It's amendable, and it really worked right away. And then, of course, there's a specific content of the Bill of Rights, slightly significant. The culture of liberty in all kinds of ways, religious liberty, civil liberty. It's part of our American greatness. Part of the reason, as I mentioned, why do people want to come here from all over the world? Constantly, still, to this day, the Bill of Rights is no small part of that. But I think a fourth point, I'll flip that last point upside down. The Anti-Federalists learned some things too. And maybe helps them that Madison, the deals made in some of the state conventions, and then Madison stepping forward to sponsor, lead drafter of the Bill of Rights. The Anti-Federalists say, a lot of them can say, you know what, this is legit. We didn't win, but we certainly shaped the final thing. And we got a big thing we were asking for, Bill of Rights. And in a way, implicitly, they're accepting Hamilton's argument in Federalist 84 about the Bill of Rights, right? Hamilton says, there's no need for a Bill of Rights. This Constitution itself is a Bill of Rights. It protects rights better than any parchment list of rights, the separation of powers and federalism. And, well, Hamilton didn't win that argument. The Bill of Rights goes forward. But the Anti-Federalists, in a way, accept it, that the whole thing is legitimate. They join in. And then in the election of 1800, which is in a way a kind of anti-federalist spirit, we want to make sure the federal government doesn't get too strong. We want the spirit of democracy, not just, elite republicanism. Well, that's not a revolution. That's within the four corners of the Constitution. I have my disagreements with Jefferson and Madison at that stage, but it's not a revolution, right? So there's the Anti-Federalists learn. And really, the Jeffersonian spirit learns from the founding debate, and they accept. You could think here we are in Arizona. You could think later to how losers come to accept and also contribute as losers. Well, Barry Goldwater, as presidential candidate, lost big in 1964. You could say, well, Richard Nixon won in 1968. Wasn't accidental. Richard Nixon wasn't the full Goldwater conservative that Ronald Reagan was, but Ronald Reagan. Okay. So Goldwater loses in 64, but shapes a political culture so that Nixon wins in 68, again in 72, Reagan in 80.
Yep.
That's changed American political culture. So the Anti-Federalists are that kind of spirit, seeming to lose, but really shaping our culture. But again, why? Because they debated. And the Federalists responded, and everybody got smarter from it. So there's some specific lessons, and then a larger lesson about America and getting smarter.
So we talk about this big takeaway of the value of debate, that reasonable, moderate disagreement, right, carried out in a civil way really matters. And you mentioned there was some name calling, there was some kind of back and forth, but for the most part, these were very well thought out arguments. this feels, again, like another lesson that we can pull out from the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, both in print and in the state ratifying constitutions of 1787, 1788. Is that another lesson we can learn from this kind of back and forth between the two groups?
Yes, very specifically, and it's in the text of the Federalist. As I mentioned, it's in practice in the state ratification conventions, gentlemen's agreements that, okay, yes, we all vote for ratifying this and our state joins. We pledge, once the government is established, to put forward Bill of Rights, traditional English Bill of Rights principles about common law rights. The Federalist invokes this principle right in the text. As I mentioned briefly in the last episode, Federalist number 1 opens, Federalist number 85 closes. It's Hamilton, who we don't associate with moderation so much. Broadway star, fiery Alexander Hamilton. But there he is, opening and closing the Federalist on the spirit. He explicitly invokes the word moderation. What does that mean? My side, we think we're right, but maybe we should have some humility and avoid the extreme of thinking the other side, they're just idiots and people of bad faith. Un-American, the phrase would be, early to use, but there what could be. No. Our side, we think we're right, but we need to hear out the other side and respond to their arguments. We still think we're right. Quietly, we might learn a thing or two on the way. So that's the opening and closing argument of the Federalists. This is what Americans do. We debate big questions. We come to resolutions. Maybe there are compromises involved, but that's what Republican self-government among a free people means. I'll go back one step. I think it helped the Federalists, especially it helped Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, to think back again to the model of George Washington. And here's a source from the founding we tend to overlook. The transmittal letter, September 17th, 1787, from Washington on behalf of the convention in Philadelphia to the Confederation Congress. Here's the work product, here's what we've been doing in Philadelphia. And there's a beautiful phrase, this magnanimous document, largely written by Washington himself. The beautiful phrase is the spirit of amity, A-M-I-T-Y, amity, the spirit of friendship. He's invoking an idea of civic friendship, which goes back to the Greeks and the Romans. What did we do over 4 months? I'm going to translate this into less gracious language. Man, we argued. Boy, we hammered out, we hammered out some compromises. It took 4 months. It was hot. There was no air conditioning. That's the truth underneath this gracious language from Washington. We worked out mutual concessions is another phrase he uses in that the transmittal letter, right? Mutual concessions and deference to each other, making compromises while, going at it hammer and tongs, so to speak, really arguing. And that phrase, spirit of amity, that's what Hamilton's trying to invoke in number 1 and number 85. Doesn't always live up to it. Americans don't always live up to it. Washington probably lives up to it better than anybody else, but he has his moments while he's president for 8 years. So civic friendship right there, spirit of amity. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Civic friendship, there's scholarship on this, and I've invoked it in a study I was a co-author of about K-12 civic education called Educating for American Democracy. My co-authors and I talked about civic virtues. So this topic that we're talking about, debate, right? One of the civic virtues we talked about is civil disagreement. Then we talked about civic friendship. The civil disagreement, whatever the policy topic is, or it's a big fundamental topic, you disagree in a reasonable, civil way with words. And reasonable civil words, not name calling. Liz, you're so stupid and you're un-American and you're demonic because you disagree with me, Liz, right? No, that's not what you do. You're making yourself stupid. And you're also not, you're sort of deficit spending a civic culture of peaceful, secure self-government. You're contributing to a downward spiral toward more anger and toward more violence, which is more stupidity.
Yes.
Right? And that's easy to do. We don't need that. So what Washington, what the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists are calling for is rise up, civic virtues, of civil disagreement and civic friendship across different political views, philosophical views, religious views, right? These are civic virtues. And why is the language used among scholars of civic virtues? I know some educators talk about civic skills and civic dispositions. Well, the dispositions part is getting close to virtues, but I think it's better to use virtues because this is hard. You know, if I think, Liz, you are really wrong about an important policy topic, or, you know, a presidential election or Senate election, and, you know, I think the stakes are big, it's hard for me to be reasonable toward you. You know,
Yeah.
you're on the other side, quote unquote, right? For me to hear you out and then expect you to hear me out, and you know, okay, you voted for the other party or the other candidate or the other policy issue. You're not stupid, evil, un-American, blah, 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 right? No, we disagree. But we're mature, Republican, self-governing citizens. We have these virtues. It's hard work and rise up to them of civil disagreement and civic friendship. So we, you know, we don't maybe think enough about the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist debate in this way. We don't think about the text of the Federalist enough this way. You don't think about the Anti-Federalist writings enough this way, but we should.
So, Dr. Carrese, we are recording this in mid-September 2025. Unfortunately, our country has seen a lot of instances of political violence in recent years that are affecting officials and public figures from both major parties. With that in mind, how can lessons from the founding debate, you know, nearly 240 years ago, about civil debate, reasonable disagreement, moderating political passions, how could those still be relevant today, even amongst all of this vitriol?
Well, thank you. It's a difficult question to be addressing. As I just mentioned, these are civic virtues, and we do badly need them today. There are other episodes of American history where we have needed them. It's not like we're in the darkest moment of American history. The Civil War was the single darkest period. When I was born in 1967, late 1960s, early 70s, yeah, I don't mean to scare anybody, right? But, you know, John F. Kennedy had been assassinated in 1963 as president. If you think about it, the fourth president has been assassinated. Not all of them for ideological reasons, clearly Lincoln and I think John F. Kennedy. But then Martin Luther King is assassinated in 1968. Shortly thereafter, John Kennedy's younger brother, Robert Kennedy, assassinated. There are bombs going off. You know, there are domestic terrorist groups. So we've had darker moments, but we need to think right now, do we want to go to darker moments? We've had darker moments. And I'll close by mentioning a great resource here from a common citizen, Abraham Lincoln, in 1838. Turns out to be among the greatest of Americans. But nobody knows who he is when he gives this address in 1838. He's out on the western frontier in Illinois, small town lawyer. 1838, to the Young Men's Lyceum in Springfield, Illinois. The topic is the perpetuation of our political institutions. It's often called the Perpetuation Address, the Lyceum Address. Just to get to the point, right? Increasing episodes of political violence, Lincoln is noticing about. He explicitly mentions, you know, alcohol and gambling, but behind it is slavery and abolition and those tensions. I think also religious pluralism. It's not too long after that you know, the founder of the Mormon religion is killed. So Lincoln is saying in 1838, the perpetuation of our entire political order is at stake. A cycle of anger, then violence, then distrust of institutions, and then before you know it, you've got strong men stepping forward saying, "Trust me, I'll fix it." You know, Caesars and Napoleons, he says. So the starkest moment of this argument is he refers to suicide, national suicide. He says, America will never be defeated by a foreign foe. You could have a Napoleon at the head of armies. They would never beat us. We would rally. If we do not survive as a self-governing national republic, it will be by, quote, by suicide. this culture of reasonable argument failing, going to violence, vitriol, distrust of institutions, disorder. That's suicide. Does that sound like hyperbole? Well, 2 decades later, there was a horrific, horrific civil war. And fortunately, we had Lincoln at the helm. But it happened. So it turns out it wasn't hyperbole and overreaction in 1838. It was an early warning, flashing red light. So I think we ought to take that flashing red light for ourselves right now. Federalist to Anti-Federalist debate is a great model. The Lincoln-Douglas debates, Senator Stephen Douglas and candidate Abraham Lincoln disagreed, just about a few minor things, right? The very meaning of America and of the Declaration of Independence, okay? They didn't trash talk each other. They didn't demonize. Stephen Douglas, the powerful man in there, could have said, no way I'm debating this loser Lincoln guy. He's a nobody. I'm not going to give him the time of day. I'm not going to give him a space, a platform. Douglas says, no, I'll debate him, right? That's what we need. And I'll close by saying Lincoln's perpetuation address has got this spirit. The Federalists have got this spirit. The final lines of the Declaration of Independence. This is a matter of sacred honor. To have these rights given by God, whatever you think that divinity might mean, to have liberty, to have equal liberty for all. This is a precious thing, and we need to up our game. We need to rise to that level and defend these, but also exercise them, practice them, protect them, perpetuate, secure these rights in our everyday political life. That's a matter of sacred honor. And the other great warning text about all of this, of course, is George Washington's farewell address, warning about partisanship, warning about, and here I'll mention this, the warning Washington gives in 1796, think about this, the more we disagree in this stupid way, factional, low politics, low, stupid partisanship, violent language leading to violence, the more we do that, the happier our enemies are abroad, delighted by it, exploiting it. Well, this is before the internet and before social media. We know as a fact, foreign enemies of our way of life of America are exploiting this kind of stupid, vicious, angry partisanship. So for all these reasons, and these great sources, I just invoke Lincoln and George Washington, and Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, we need to up our game and find the better, Lincoln's first inaugural address, the better angels of our nature.
Yes. Dr. Carrese, thank you so much. I know that is a hard question, and I really appreciate that you gave us more primary sources to look at, because I think as teachers in classrooms, those are incredibly helpful for having students understand history, understanding our politics, and thank you so much for your expertise.
Thank you, Liz.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Civics in a Year. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who cares about a constitutional republic as much as you do. For more episodes, resources, and updates, follow us on social media or visit us at civics.asu.edu. Make sure to check out the show notes for any relevant links. Special thanks to the United States Marine Band for their performance of the Stars and Stripes Forever. Let's keep building a stronger constitutional republic, one episode at a time.